Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Workplace Trends India. We have a very special guest for the third episode of our leadership series today. We here today for a candid chat with Diego Soroa, an executive coach for exponential transformation. He is an award-winning innovator focused on disruption. In this role, he has inspired and advised some of the largest organizations to design and implement disruptive innovation strategies. He is one of the most celebrated coaches and has developed several strategies model being used by companies across the world. When I first heard him speaking a few weeks ago, I was mesmerized by his depth of knowledge, innovative thinking, and the vision he painted for the future of real estate and how we can shape it. It was a life-changing experience. I wanted to learn from him for my personal growth, but also knew that he would be an invaluable source for knowledge for all of us on Workplace Trends India. So today we are privileged to have him with us to share his insight on the future of real estate industry and designing disruptive strategies for exponential transformation. Diego, tell us more about your personal journey and what led you become such a successful innovator.
Hello, Tushar. Thanks for such a kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with all of the attendees. So I don't know if it's going to be life-changing, but hopefully at least it'll give you some insight, some light on what the future might look like or what is the future that we want to build together. My personal experience, my journey started as an architect. But during the better part of my career, I've always was fascinated by the amazing potential of technology to change the way we do things and to change what we understand as a public space and our operating systems. So for a good part of my time, I realized that the intersection between art and technology was a sweet spot for myself. At the beginning, I thought that architecture and design was probably the most transformative approach that we could have towards reality. And then later on, I understood that maybe the questions that we ask ourselves might be more relevant on that transformation. So as I understood that, I started collecting those questions, asking those questions, and working with companies worldwide to start that transformation. I created projects that were hard to classify, and I won several entrepreneur awards, and that took me to Singularity University, that think tank in which people from all around the world try to understand and decipher the potential implications of the accelerated pace of technologies. And so that was a pivotal moment in my career in which I decided to focus all of my efforts and attention to understanding and helping others understand the technologies and what kind of futures these technologies might bring to us. Now, after some 10 years of experience in the consulting and coaching world, I've worked with companies worldwide, and it is a true privilege to try to help them solve the imagination project. We have a problem of the image of the future that we want to participate on building. And so I try to help those organizations identify where disruption might come from and what kind of reactions they could propose towards building that image of the future.
Yeah, great. So, Diego, I've heard you on that forum, and then I had a long session with you recently. What is special about real estate? You are so enthusiastic and you are giving so much, insights and, deep disruptive technologies about real estate. What is your attachment and what is special about real estate for you?
So I think, Mital, what is special about real estate for me is similar to some extent by the conversations that we have had for you. Real estate is ultimately the scenography of our lives. I mean, that is where our lives take place. So only for that it makes a lot of sense to pay attention to the major changes on that scenography. It is also, as an architect and as an urban planner, is also the main space for research and for my activity, or it was in the past. But it is also the space in which all of our intelligence systems overlap. We have the economical systems, the political systems, the infrastructure systems. It is like the hive, the sum of all of our collective intelligence. And yet I have the feeling that there's many questions open. We still have not cracked it. We still have not deciphered it. And I find it is fascinating. Moreover, As I talk with many companies in this dual role of urban planner, architect, and also as a company consultant, I see that there is a lot of things that we can learn from the cities, from what's going on in the cities, and especially from the resilience that cities have. And let me give you a quick example of this. If you ask anyone, any founder of a company, how long will his company last? Probably, well, depending on who you ask, they might think that it will last forever. We know that is no longer true. We know that the lifespan of companies is dropping massively over the years. It was back in the 60s, it was about 60 years old, the lifespan of a Fortune 500 company, and now it's a little less than 20 years. And we see that trend is ongoing. But if you ask about when cities will die, see, there's no right answer to that. There's no necessarily a body of knowledge, and the only reference point that we have about that is when they were founded, because cities tend not to die, and that I find fascinating. So we go back to the organizations, and we see Kongo Gumi was probably the oldest organization that we've known, and interestingly, it was dedicated to construction. It was a Japanese, a South Korean company operating in Japan, and it was dedicated to the construction of buildings, of wooden temples and wooden residential buildings. It was founded 578 after Christ, and it has been the longest living company for many, many years, but sadly, in 2006, it was forced to close. Why? Because there was just too many changes, just too many ongoing processes that they couldn't put up with. So that parallelism with between the organizations and the cities, those contrast is something that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah. So, what are the key technologies affecting real estate? Like we like as I've discussed with you in last session. Like if we look at the hard drive, which was transported earlier in the big truck, and now today we are it is on our thumbnail. The lithium battery size and prices, or maybe many things which has been changed, drastically. If you look at the prices of LED lights, it has been completely changed. Like the LED light we were buying for so much of a huge cost. Today it is like as cheap as any normal light. So, but the commercial real estate or maybe real estate has not changed that drastically. We see the same building, same life cycle. Even like in the workspaces, like the cost of making workspaces 20 years back versus today, it is not much change. So, what are the key technologies which is disrupting real estate?
In the past, I would have said there's two fundamental technologies affecting the shape and the experience of the city overall. But lately, I've broadened my perspective. This on screen is a fantastic view of New York in 1865, and you'll find the city to be quite homogeneous in the vertical dimension. It's only topped by churches or cathedrals, etc. And other than that, it was mainly all 4 or 5 stories high. The maximum size was pretty much determined by how many stairs, how many floors people will be willing to climb. And then we have now this other vision of New York, which is pretty difficult. And of course, we see a completely different skyline. One of the defining technologies of skyline is, of course, the elevator. The elevator allows the cities to grow vertically. The elevator was first invented in 1854. And actually, it was invented and used for the first time in New York, but there was major refusal. I mean, people did not want to use it, so it took some other years in order to be successful. But this is, I would say, the enabling technology, besides others that allow the vertical growth of the city. So just like we talk about the wheel, and he's a magnificent example from Pascal Finet. He tells us that the wheel is not actually the technology or the invention that really changed things in mobility. It is the axle, right? The axle that connects both wheels. So I would say that the elevator probably has that role, axiomatic role, in the definition of the sky, the skyline of our cities. And there's yet another one, another technology that is fundamental, which is on the change of the city, which is the car. If the elevator allowed us to grow vertically, the car allowed us to grow horizontally, right? So we have the car and the elevator and the two main forces defining our city. And of course, any major force or any major change in these forces, in these technologies, could have a massive impact on the city itself. So now, interestingly, we have elevators that move not only vertically but also horizontally, and they move 60 times faster than they used to in the past. So now, thanks to this change, a major change on this pivotal technology, we are starting to see things such as this one. This is a horizontal skyscraper that is perched 820 feet on the air in China. I mean, to be honest, it's not truly a skyscraper. We call it a skyscraper, but it's more of a sky bridge. But I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing many more of these, especially now that in China, the skyscrapers have been banned over 500 meters tall. They've just been banned. So this is a potentiality now that technology is unleashing. Very interesting to see how the changes on the elevator are changing potentially the skyline of the city. There's of course also many changes in the other technology, the horizontal enabling technology, the one that created the urban sprawl, and that is the car. This is the self-driving car. This is myself with that stupid face, look on my face when I was testing the self-driving car, the Google self-driving car in the Moffett field in a NASA base in Silicon Valley some years ago. It is truly amazing. But not only is it amazing on itself, because it really truly drives itself, it is amazing the implications that it's going to have in the city. See, if the city is defined by the car, major changes on the way that we define the car are definitely going to have a major impact on the city. So what's going to happen, for example, between the relationship between the car and the pedestrian, or what's going to happen with all of the parking spaces that we dedicate to cars currently. This is a major cost on the building or the construction of buildings, the parking, and now we might see that they're no longer necessary. So how is that going to impact the city? Well, moreover, what would a city without traffic jams look like? Because these cars self-drive, so they have the ability to maintain a relative distance, constant or variable, and to prevent all kind of traffic jams to happen. So can you imagine what is a city without a traffic jam? I mean, it's an image that we are so used to that probably is very difficult to imagine, right? That kind of experience. Moreover, when the car drives itself, what happens with the price of the city center versus the price of the periphery? Now we see that there is an increase of the demand of the peripheric residential areas in diminishment of the city center. Why? Well, because you can live further away and actually as you commute towards your place, you can be working, you can be sleeping. So there's going to be a transfer of functionalities between the office or the home and the car itself. And it also opens the door to one incredible scenario that's we were used to in the past, which is the nomadic behaviors, much more nomadic behaviors, right? So this was a chimera some years ago, and actually when it came out 6 years ago or 7 years ago, the cost of the whole system was around 300,000 K. So it was very interesting of a research project. But then now the prices are dropping massively, and they're getting better and better. It was 75,000 K 3 years ago, and now it's under 1,000 K to really make the full transformation between the normal car and the self-driving car. And guess what? It's not only the Googles of the world that are doing this, it's also startups that are having a very relevant position in the self-driving field. So we will see a lot of this, and that technology is definitely going to massively change the way that we design and the way that we experience cities. Let me remind you that there is an exponential evolution on the impact that these technologies have, because the very technologies are suffering an exponential change. So this is the cost of, I'm going to describe for a second the cost of the LiDAR. The LiDAR is this part described on the top of the car that is actually sensing systematically the surroundings, right? So this is what the car looked like, the LiDAR looked like with in top of the car some years ago, and this is the cost the LiDAR had. In 2009, in 2012, it was $75,000. In 2010, they dropped to $50. And in 2020, they are expected to cost less than $5. And this is the relative size compared to a dime. So we see that these technologies are suffering an exponential change in the price performance and also in the size. So there's even now companies such as Tesla that are suggesting that the LiDAR might no longer be relevant. So we are completely digitizing the hardware that was enabling this technology. So I've described basically two technologies that, in my opinion, were really defining the shape of the city: the elevator and the car. But I think there is yet a third one, and I was only able to see it after the impact of the COVID. I think this very technology that was invented in 1876 in the surroundings of the appearance of the first skyscrapers was also truly relevant. Why? Because the phone actually was a substitute of mobility. No longer did you need to climb all of those stairs if you can take a phone and reach anyone for a 2-minute conversation, right? So it is a completely different approach to serve a need, which is the need to connect. So we've solved the need to connect via mobility in the past, and now we see that that connection is basically being done by digital technologies, by the phone, by the internet, etc. So this very technology, I believe, is the one that probably we should be paying more attention in. This technology and the evolutions and the variations, of course, of this technology. Why? Because the 20th century was all about physicality, right? We built it, we extracted, we transported. And we also saw on top of that value pyramid, we saw that some products were physical, like the Kindle, and they were information enabled. And then only on top of that, we saw a little, on the peak of the pyramid of value pyramid, we saw some activities or some business models that were completely information enabled. Now we see that in this fourth industrial revolution, this logic is being twisted. Now what has more value is the information, and information flows, data flows via digital technologies. So it is digital technologies that we probably should be thinking of.
Yeah. Great. These kind of change in the technology, cost, and the particularly disruption in any kind of behavior. Like what kind of scenario or what kind of change you are seeing in the real estate? What scenarios are perceived for the real estate, especially?
So the scenarios is an effort that I very much enjoy. I think there is no certainty about what the future is going to look like. But of course, there is very many limitations that we have on our intuitive thinking. So our intuition copes very hardly with exponential logics, with this logic of the doubling price performance of the technologies, or the potential impact of a combination of technologies that are now ready for massive impact. So we're not very good at predicting the future. We are not certain, of course, about what the future is going to look like, and everything that we can do is try to project scenarios, to try to substitute our intuitive thinking by intentional or deliberative thinking. There's a lot of alternatives, and I'm going to cover some of those scenarios. Some of these scenarios are actually intended to provoke a completely different kind of thinking process and a completely different kind of understanding of what the challenges and the opportunities we might have in the future. So let me cover, well, one of them that we've already talked about is the self-driving at level 5, and also the mobility as a service. So I think there is a massive impact, as we've described, on the way we design residential, on the way we design cities, on the curve of the price, on what the destination looks like, how long we decide to travel, where do we decide to travel, and what kind of activities we start doing with while we travel. Probably now in the near future, we're going to be deciding what route we take based on the connectivity that we have inside of the car, instead of the quality of the road itself, right? So all of these variations, I think we should be ready for, and ready to understand this massive transfer of functionalities between residential or office space and the new extension of the office space, which will be the self-driving car. But this is just one of them, and I think it might be to some extent obvious. I'm very much interested about the surge of the new air borough. I mean, we are very much accustomed to the mobility and transportation and commuting happening normally at the floor level or as a sub-floor level, but we're not that used to to this concept of the air borough. And what will happen once we start systematizing the transportation via drones, and we see that there is a growing trend there, not only for people and also for goods, etc. We'll see that the airspace is going to be started to be populated massively. So that is, again, gonna massively change the way that we design buildings. Probably the rooftop for the office space is going to be of paramount importance as a landing space, but also the very facade. I mean, now you might have a drone delivering you the pizza to your facade, and maybe you need to think of a facade as a battery of little ports where you can download, or you can just pick up your load and let the drone take off again. So what happens when we start incorporating these air borough as the new borough? See, that is something that probably will come to many of us as a surprise, and we need to be reactive to this. We see that there is a lot of efforts in this direction. I was just showing you the Uber's example, but there's, all of the major companies are working in these drones. It's no longer a promise, it's already reality in some cities, etc. So what is the enabling technology for this? Well, of course, there's many limitations to the drones. One of them is the noise. They're still noisy, so the electric engines here will have a lot to do. The silent drones probably will be the axial, right? The axle, the silence in the evolution of these drones, but also the load capacity or the capacity of the batteries, right? And if we go to take a look at the capacity of the batteries, we once again see an exponential trend. This is the growth of the deployed battery storage capacities globally, and we see that here also in this enabling technology, which is the battery, we see an exponential trend. So we might need to start getting accustomed to this idea of the drones populating our skies, populating our cities, because probably the driver for this kind of a technology is the comfort, and this makes a lot of sense, both in terms of economics and also in terms of comfort. So that opens the door to yet another scenario, which is what if we are so used to taking drones that we no longer need airports? How could that happen? Well, what is the rationale behind the airports? The airports exist in the surroundings of the city because they're noisy. The planes are noisy, and because they need to land and take off horizontally. So the drones take off vertically, and whenever we achieve the noiseless drone, probably there'll be no basic reason to go to an airport. Well, maybe for some kind of users, but we might be anticipating a technology that could be massively disrupting the airports. Well, there is yet another technology that might have a massive impact on the airports. If you think about the business model of the airports, I would say that it's inefficiency, right? You need to spend some time there in order to be scanned and to go through the security gates. But now we have these exponential growth of the virtual ID beacons and these security technologies that allow us to just flow through and don't spend any time at the airport. So if you don't spend time at the airport, you don't spend money at the airport, and that basic business model of the airport, which is a sophisticated mall, will no longer work. So there is yet another reason to anticipate a potential. I'm not saying this is going to happen, I'm just suggesting these as a scenario. So this is the value of the scenarios. We need to be prepared for this reality and to make sure we're not investing massive amounts of monies in infrastructures that might be obsolete in the near future. Let's think, for example, about the port, the commercial ports. If we have a drone capacity enough to carry a container, well, maybe not one drone, but 4 drones able to carry a container from the ship to the train, what is the role of the maritime port or the commercial port? Well, probably none. That transition, that interface is already solved by another technology. So imagine that you're now about to invest massive amounts of resources, time and money to the remodeling of your port. Well, maybe this is something that you should take into consideration. Another thing that might be another scenario that I want to bring to your attention is this idea of the full automation and robotization. We are accustomed to hire contractors and hire employees and hire people actually to build our buildings. But we are seeing an increasing explosion of robotization and automation in many of the fields of construction. We see that we are starting with the most delicate or with the most dangerous one, but there's no reason to foresee that these robotization will not go on. So I don't know if it's a desired scenario or not, but I think it's a major force that we should definitely try to reinterpret our reality through, because these might happen. And there is a combination of two previous scenarios that I just described, which is what will happen once we have these automation and also these automated economic transactions. We're talking about the blockchain and all of these coins that allow systematic interactions without the mediation of people. Imagine you have a container that was just unloaded into the port, and that container wants to go to Madrid, for instance, in Spain. So that container has a negotiating capability. It has a digital wallet that can actually negotiate with other containers the priority to be loaded. And he can actually negotiate automatically via smart contracts, etc. And they can negotiate with a specific kind of truck. I want an electric truck that is going to arrive to Madrid in this time frame. So those negotiations can be done individually, independently of us. So now we see that money is being generated by the machines and by the algorithms. That is actually one of the visions of Tesla for the self-driving. It is creating a marketplace for the Teslas to be generating their own money. So this is also a reality that we should definitely be considering. But the scenario that I believe is more relevant in this context is without any doubt the virtual scenario. The digitization. I mean, this is, as I was saying, the evolution of the phone. Now we are multiplying the reality, the physical space, the sense of place, the sense of proximity. It's being doubled, it's being multiplied with the digital world, and now this is redefining massively the way we live and the way we understand our own reality. The sense of community is changing, the sense of friendship, the sense of work, the sense of proximity, the sense of intimacy. Everything is now being changed by digital technologies and moreover by these digital spaces. So I think there's going to be a massive growth of these kind of technologies, and I would consider these as probably the most relevant ones to be observing. See, we are seeing now that we have technologies like these digital cameras, or like this camera that I have in front of me, that can very quickly and in a pretty accurate way create a 3D model, an avatar of myself, right? So it's replicating my physicality and creating an avatar. And now we see that that is happening not only with people, but also with the whole city. There was recently an article called, well, it was a cover article in Wire magazine some months ago actually, and it was called The Mirror World, Welcome to the Mirror World. And it was precisely representing this trend in which the virtual reality is representing the physical reality, and it's mirroring it. So now we will have a double understanding of what it means to be moving around the world, because it's going to be a replica of our movements in the digital world, or we'll be occupying or giving a conference such as this one in the physical world, because there will be a mirror world. So we see that people are going to be and people are actually being replicating in this mirror world. But some of you, many of you, I would say logically would tell me, yes, Diego, but the physical world has many more advantages than the mirror world. For instance, how do you move in the virtual world? You cannot move. I mean, you have these Googles or these augmented reality glasses, but basically you're constrained to that space, right? Because otherwise you'll be bumping around with things, etc. Well, that is a question that some people have asked already, and I believe that to be an amazing, a beautiful question. How do we move through the virtual world? Well, if you have the question, only when you have the question, you might be halfway there towards an amazing answer, an original solution. And this is the solution that I've found, I believe it's in the MIT. This is precisely the kind of initiative that I believe now it's in the infancy, of course, but we're going to see a boom of these initiatives that are going to be bridging the physical with the virtual. It might be at a visual level or at a brain level, and there's the effort that Elon Musk is doing with a neural connection, or at the physical level, etc. Some of you still will say there's nothing that will substitute touch, and I agree. Now, touching someone, touching some things is unbeatable, right? But then we see that this touch is also capacity that is being replicated and even amplified by means of using digital technologies. Let me give you a very quick reference about this. This is research project that has over 1,800 actuators placed throughout your body. Okay, and it tries to emulate the feelings, the sensations that you might have in the physical world and translate into the virtual world. So this is an early stage project. By the way, I believe the future of clothing might be very much related to this, as it interfaces physical, digital, etc. But we'll see, and we see a lot of early initiatives, I would say just early initiatives that go in that direction. So the touch also, in my opinion, will be one way or another optimized, or at least replicated in the virtual space. And you'll say, yes, Diego, but there's then all the other feelings, all the other perceptions that are going to be irreplicable. And my guess is not. My guess is our emotional experience, or our experience in general, is limited by the physical capability that our senses have. I mean, I only see so far, but maybe in the digital where I could see much further, I can see even in the past, or I can see augmented information. So I can also smell further in the digital world, and I can also walk faster. I mean, all of these limitations that are consubstantial to our nature might be overwritten. I just bought, I'm an early adopter, I buy this stuff. I just bought these. This is called a Wooger. And what this does is a device that allows you to feel the music in your body. So you place it wherever you want in your body, and you will feel the bass of your body. See, this is only possible in the physical world when you are really close to the subwoofer, or when you're really close to the amplifier. And now digital technologies are allowing us for a completely different experience of the music. So my guess is that we're going to see that, and there might be a future, as provocative as this might sound, in which being present in the virtual world might be a more complete experience than being present in the physical world. Okay, well, I'm not even considering the amount of data that we might collect of ourselves to make a full experience ad hoc to my personality or my immediate needs. So on top of these, we have yet one more force, which I believe is fantastical. I mean, it's just incredible, the effect that this COVID-19 is having. I mean, all of the assumptions that we had related to the city, to the concept of place, to the concept of proximity, mobility, transportation, all of that now has changed in only a matter of weeks, well, 3 months at the most. And in part due to the technologies that we are seeing, and in part especially due to the COVID-19. This is a massive accelerating force to trends that we were already seeing. So that's why I like to describe it as a magnifying lens. It magnifies everything. It brings us the future closer, right? By means of forcing us to do some experiences, some experiments that we wouldn't have considered otherwise. So now we need to think in terms of not moving. What can be done without moving? How much work can be done without moving? How much medicine, delivery, entertainment? What if the first option is mobility second, or stay at home first? See, this is a new reality that is being catalyzed by the COVID-19. So there's a lot of questions to explore around this. Why, for instance, will we move in the future? Because in the past, we move goods, or we move to go to goods. Now, maybe the reasons for us to move from one place to another, and the concept of destination will massively change too.
Yeah. So, Diego, where do you think this disruption in real estate will emerge from, and what are the changes we are less aware of? I think it is very, very interesting that what you have said about the mobility and the vertical kind of lift versus the horizontal lifts. But actually, what are the reasons where this disruption is coming in the real estate?
Right. So in real estate, there is a lot going on. I mean, there is so many different categories that could be incorporated in real estate, and so many different technologies and realities affecting real estate. And here we have a quick list, a quick description of some of them. We have 3D printing, we have agriculture tech, artificial intelligence, blockchain, commercial space, travel, driverless. I mean, all of these technologies are actually, for the better part, they are ready for early experimentations, the majority of them. And not only that, we see that they are being combined into augmented, amplified efforts and amplified disruptive potential. So one of the efforts that I've seen in the past was taking all of the areas of interest and all of these technologies and do these non-intentional, I would say, disruption research. What can we do with this technology in this field? Actually, these I saw it done in Google workshop in Berlin, and I was really afraid that this is the way that we approach disruptive research. I don't think we should do that. I mean, I'm not saying that this is not generative. Of course, we can find, via serendipity or randomness, we can find connections, and I'm not diminishing the value of these connections, but I would say that disruption and the very concept of disruption is relative to something. See, the exponential technology, the exponential growth of a technology is relative to itself, it's self-reference. But disruption, when you talk about disruption, you're disrupting necessary something. So a force or reality might be disruptive to one company and not disruptive to the next one. So we need to really understand that contextual relevance of a disruption, right? And in that sense, I would say that this approach is completely unspecific. Where will disruption happen? So I think it's very complicated to anticipate these. There's people like Christian Christensen that suggested that disruption would happen from the bottom up, from those areas of the market that we have left unserved. There'll be newcomers that serve those areas in a different way, and eventually they'll grow to outperform us. I think, though, that there is a different concept, which is called the collision approach, which I believe to be more relevant. Collision not coming from the bottom, but coming from the right, or coming from the left, or coming from a different arena, paraphrasing Rita McGrath. She suggests that no longer do we need to interpret our industry as an enclosed category, but we need to broaden our perspective and to be ready to understand other actors and what the specific role of those actors might be in our industry. This is an example of this is Apple, for example, jumping to self-driving car, or jumping to music, or Netflix jumping to generating content. See, you see adjacent sectors or unrelated sectors jumping to your activity. So I would say that if there's any major place that we can say disruption will come from, it'll be from the side, from an industry that is completely unrelated. Those are the kind of outlooks that we should be looking at having, because otherwise we're going to miss it. We're going to be expecting somebody from our industry, from our category, to come up with something disruptive, and that rarely happens. Disruptions typically happen from another sector, from another arena. So to say it in other words, I'd say that disruption will happen here at our assumptions. These are all of the fundamental assumptions that we have related to our business, related to our industry, to the challenges that we have, to the purpose of the organization, to the way we create value, the relationship we have all the stakeholders with our employees, the competitive advantages, the moats, those things that supposedly protect us from competitors in a sustainable way, our operating system, the organizational architecture. Those are the certainties that were validated in the past. But many of those certainties will no longer be relevant. We are seeing that the changes out there are so massive, so rapid, that the certainties that we have, we should only consider them temporarily true. So to say it in a provocative way, if you want, disruption will happen precisely at these certainties. So it's a very good idea to review each one of those certainties, to identify your assumptions and to review them and turn them into hypotheses, to make sure that you're not building yourself out of the equation, right? By means of taking forward assumptions that are now obsolete. So I'm just going to cover a couple of those efforts, and I think they are representative of pretty much the whole effort of reviewing your assumptions. One of them is reviewing the problem space, and another one is reviewing the solution space. See, this is a very simple approach, but if you get this right, I think you'll get a much broader perspective of what you might be looking at and what kind of challenges and possibilities are open for you and your company. Okay, so let's look at this idea of the changes in the problem space. And I'm going to bring yet one more example coming from the mobility sector, which is the CEO of Volvo suggesting that in the future, they will accept the liability, the responsibility, the legal responsibility, the insurance when the cars are driving in autonomous mode. Why? Because nobody else was doing it. So they have now autonomous trucks, they have now autonomous cars to some extent, and they see that there is a liability problem. So there was a problem that was not identified in the past and that is uncovered, so they need to jump in and cover it. See, auto car maker industry or agent jumping to an insurance sector, which is an adjacent sector, but is not necessarily their sector. So we're going to see a lot of these, and we're seeing it across companies and across industries. Let me give you another example of how the problem is being redefined by means of these technologies. This is an example that everybody has heard of, Kodak. Kodak in the past was based on the scarcity. It was based on the scarcity of these. We have a limited number of exposures. They were really expensive, and it took some time to get, once you took the picture with a lot of care because they were so expensive, it took some time for you to get back the picture. And now we see that we have a completely different reality. I've hacked the image here on the bottom to represent, instead of a 26 exposure, infinite exposures, because this is the kind of reality that we have now. The scarcity around the exposures is no longer real. Now we have an enabling technology that was discovered by this guy, actually, from Kodak, and it's the digital camera. And now the problem space has changed. I mean, in the past, Kodak was solving the problem of the high resolution, the high quality, the price, the chemicals, etc. And now there is a completely different problem that they might not have seen. Well, actually, they clearly did not see, because they almost went to bankruptcy. But there was a company, a very little company, a startup just done by 11 individuals, or 13 in the time it was acquired, that was really clear on what the new problem was regarding the image, the pictures. And that problem is the abundance of pictures. What do I do with all of these pictures? How do I curate them? How do I filter them? There's just too much. So Instagram comes here to solve the new problem, not the problem of scarcity, but the problem of abundance. See, this concept of abundance is, in my opinion, a heuristic. It's a concept introduced by Singularity University, by Peter Diamandis. It's also a concept that we use a lot at exponential organizations, at EXO, and it's foundational. I would say it's of paramount importance, of understanding in the past what was the scarcity that I was leveraging, and in the future what is the abundance that could substitute that scarcity. So we need to, I've used here these 8 symbol and the infinite symbol as well, and the glass symbol. So there's 3 ideas here. You need to be exposed to this concept of abundance, of the infinite abundance, at least 8 times, in order to really make a dent on your interpretation of your reality, your perspective. But once you see it, you'll see that it's like again, a rule of thumb that you can apply to understand what is the exponential potential of an idea. Is it leveraging an abundance, or is it leveraging a scarcity? There's many examples, and actually in our sector too, that explain how other companies, in this case Airbnb, is thriving, or was thriving before COVID, by means of leveraging an existing abundance of empty spaces. We see that throughout these unicorns. What they've done is precisely perfect this idea of identifying abundance and tapping into those abundances. So this is exactly my suggestion. Try to reinterpret your problem space through the lens of abundance, right? So there's many examples here, like Uber, the largest taxi company, owning no vehicles, Facebook owning no content, Alibaba has no inventory, Airbnb has no real estate. I remember the CEO of Airbnb saying some years ago that Hyatt, their competitors, wanted to increase the number of rooms that they had in 14,000 during a given year, and he suggested that they were going to do that in 2 weeks. Why? Because they're leveraging assets. The cost of increasing the pool of rooms, of spaces, is just the marketing cost. It's really, really low in comparison with the real estate cost, the building cost, etc. So reinterpret your reality through the lens of abundance, and reinterpret your problem through the lens of abundance, and ask yourself, what abundance are you leveraging, or what abundance could you be leveraging? One more suggestion, which is once again brought by the fantastical Christian Christensen: really understand, reassess the job to be done. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples that I believe are quite relevant. So Domino's Pizza. Domino's Pizza it's a very good example of this. In the past, when his CEO Peter Doyle took over in 2010, I believe it was, the pizza was really, really bad. And they acknowledged that the pizza was really, really bad, but they understood themselves as a pizza company. And then Patrick Doyle took over in 2010, and he suggested the real issue here was no longer delivering the pizza, but was meeting the anxiety of the customers to receive the pizza fast, the hunger, and so they interpret themselves as a logistics intelligence company. And by means of reinterpreting their activity, the job to be done, and that was their claim, to give you a pizza under 30 minutes or will be free. They will they really turn around the understanding of the company, the internal understanding, and has the battery of products and services and activities that they will be focusing on internally. And you know what else flipped completely? The stock. It was under $9 per shares when he took over, and now when he left, it was above $160 per share. And that is just by means of interpreting your activity, the job to be done, in a different way. A different example that is there to me, because I work with this company, Rossini. Rossini is a suspension engine company, one of the most important, or the most important probably in the Americas. And so what they do is suspension mechanisms for Tesla, for Maserati, for the pickup truck, etc. So in the past, the problem that they needed to solve was relative to the weight. You know, these components weight a lot, so it was all about reducing the weight of these components, right? This is the 5 initial weeks after doing a sprint that I did with them, in which we started using completely different design technologies and manufacturing technologies. I'm talking about 3D printing, and in only 5 weeks they were able to reduce 10% the weight of their components. So that is a massive increase or decrease of weight. I mean, that is really, really relevant. But what was more interesting was the next step. They really understood that one of the new variables, one of the new challenges, the new job to be done was related to the noise. Why? Because now we have another technology, which is the electric car that has no noise. So the little squeakies that these products of them would make were no longer covered by the noise of the engine. So now they have a new problem to solve, and they had no parameters for that. Luckily, we had been using parametric design in the previous phase, so they could now start allocating some variables, some parameters to try to decipher and to codify where the noise might come from. So now the noise is a completely new problem that they need to be facing, and that wasn't the case in the past. Let's look at just 2 more examples. We have Starbucks here. Starbucks, the challenge or the job to be done for Starbucks was, interestingly, the creation of the third space. That is the transition between home and office. They wanted a transition. I mean, people were demanding a momentary pause between their work and their home. And that transitional space was exactly what Starbucks was offering. So now that we are working so frequently at home, where is the transition? You know, now they are massively re-adapting or pivoting the business model to the delivery system. And we're going to see a lot of this happening. And that will only happen once we really understand that the job to be done in the past is not necessarily the same as the job to be done in the future. So this is an open question for you. What is the job to be done in your context, in real estate? And we could list simply 3 activities like the design, the construction or the management. Is that representative of what you do, of the job that you do in your context? Well, maybe it is, but maybe it is also time to start thinking again, what is the business I'm in? What need do I need to solve? What is the job to be done in this context? Interestingly, I was talking to Tushar some time ago, and I did a little research, and I found that you, Tushar, wrote this article, right, about in the Times of India, suggesting that collaboration software will gain more importance due to COVID. And in conversations with you, precisely, I understood that collaboration is in part one of the jobs that you solve. You put together people in order to collaborate, in order to solve problems. But we see that there is a massive and exponential growth, and we can go to the markets again to see the growth of a tool such as this one that we're using now. The Zoom tools, or all of these telepresence tools, they're definitely changing what we understand per collaboration. I mean, probably it'll be very difficult to have me in India for this conversation, or to be able to interact with all of you if we didn't have these means. So now we are enabling, we're connecting further, we're connecting better, I would say. Not for everything, but for many things. We are connecting and collaborating better through these tools. So if enabling spaces for collaboration was the job to be done in the past, what is the job to be done in the present? How do we adapt our value proposition to what is happening? And can we decouple the physical space from all of these tools that increase and enable our collaboration capabilities? Because if we split them, probably we are splitting our capabilities of growth as well. So I talk a little bit about the problem space, and there's also many changes on the solution space. And I'm going to finish with this. This is an example that I believe illustrates the disruption that I see in my own activity, at least in the activity that I was trained for, which is architectural design. See, when we think about architecture, we think of or at least I was trained to think about a sophisticated activity that was a combination of many different areas. Like you needed to know physics, you needed to know aesthetics, you needed to know resistance of materials, you needed to know structure, you needed to know history. So there's so many different variables that apply to architecture that we think probably will be one of the hardest things to codify or to automate. And I am here to tell you that probably we're completely wrong. Probably the value of the design is going to be massively disrupted and hence demonetized. And I want to take you through a little journey, 5 steps towards the disruption of architectural design. I'm going to go a little fast because we don't have much time left, and we'll love to have a little bit of an interaction with you. But let me take you through these 5 steps. So in the past, design was basically a human thing, human-made, handmade. So we emulated nature. We tried to emulate with more or less success nature. And here these pillars are an abstraction of these trees, these palm trees. And then we've quickly understand that we needed to make a simplification. And that is why we started using this kind of architecture, the lentil architecture, that made it simpler, modular, simpler to build. Of course, it's not as efficient in nature, but it made things a little easier. So what we'll do is we draw everything. And if we had to draw a staircase, and helix staircase, I'll draw one for you, and if another one will ask me for another staircase, I'll have to design or to draw one more, right? It was when I started my architectural career, some of you might remember that in the audience, but we used to do everything with a rod ring, and it was a really painful process. Then we started, we see the rise of the computer-assisted design. So you design, but the computer assists you. And this was the kind of software that we are using. And this is actually an office building that I built some 3 years ago using precisely these tools, trying to create a flow, space, but etc. But everything was basically handmade with the assistance of the computer. But if I had to create a staircase in the past, even with a computer-assisted design with CAD or AutoCAD, etc., I would have to replicate or start all over if I needed to change the shape of the material, etc. Then we go to a third step in which we start parameterizing the design. So now we can, instead of designing shape, we can start designing parameters and the relative weight of each one of those parameters. Okay, so now we can start designing actually in an Excel sheet, and we can actually unlock the potential or unlock the shape. If you think about it, this kind of a project, this is by Jurgen Meyer in the south of Spain, by Arup, this is very complicated to draw if the process is not automated, if the process is not parameterized. And the beauty of these parameters is that you can just take the variables that you want and equalize them to get any complex shape that you want. So now with these technologies, we have a complexity that is being liberated. These technologies, and on top of that, the 3D printing. Now complexity is completely free, and we can prototype for free. We can prototype shapes that we couldn't prototype in the past. We still need to design the relationship between the variables, but that now is something that we can equalize. See, when we can equalize things, that means that I can parameterize all of the codes, all of the variables related to the design of a building, and any of you, whether you know architecture or not, can use my code to actually design their own solution. So that means that we are lowering the barrier of entry to design. We are democratizing design. Okay, and there is yet 2 more steps. One of them is the generative design, in which no longer do I generate the shapes by equalizing. We see that we have genetic algorithms that can evolve the design into not one output, but myriads of different outputs automatically generated. See, this is actually how nature designs. This is precisely what we see in nature, and we are seeing many tools like Autodesk and many companies like Boeing, for example, using this generative design approach to improve massively the cost and improve the weight of their components and the efficiency of their components. So we see that now we can do things that in the past were completely obscure or unattainable to us, thanks to these growth of the exponential or of the tools related to design. We are now reaching this concept of the exponential design, and we are unlocking shapes that were inaccessible to us in the past. We see that this is transcending across industries, and we see that we have more and more examples of these happening. The beauty of this is that we are transitioning from the computer-assisted design to a human-assisted design. Imagine the value proposition to your clients when the activity is designing for them. Well, maybe now you can become a designer of your own reality, of your own space, of your own virtual reality. And that is something completely new. So some will see it, some will leverage that, some others will not. But probably we need to assume that the cost per designer as the basic unit for invoicing in the past is no longer going to be the reality in the future, as we see an explosion of these technologies. So one more thing is that these technologies once again enable other technologies, right? I used this metaphor several times of the wheels and the axle. The 3D printing, for example, is the wheel, but you cannot unlock 3D printing until you democratize design. I'm not going to say I'm an expert designer, but I know how to design with digital tools. And if there's something that breaks for me, like this little cover here, I will not take the time to design it because it just takes forever. So that happens to me, that I'm an expert designer, and what will not happen to somebody that has never interfaced with a design software. So once we see this boom of generative design, this explosion of generative design, we'll see that other technologies such as 3D printing, domestic and residential 3D printing, will probably boom. And hence probably we'll need to once again review all of our assumptions.
Yeah. So I think, Diego, as we discussed that day also, that how, this COVID, or especially this, scenario has changed a lot of, industries. And particularly earlier, the mobility was first and the connection was later. Remember, we discussed about the offices, how offices were used, first mobility and then connectivity. Today, the mobility is zero and there is only connectivity, and connectivity through the digital. So will it be a fully digital world? Will it be a fully physical world? Or there will be in between something, So what is, before I jump to my another question, I wanted to understand that, the Starbucks has changed their fundamentals. There was a space between office and home, but today they say that there is no that concept, viable. They are going for a completely pickup solution. So would you like to just give a little light on this?
So, to be honest, I don't know exactly what will happen regarding the future of work. I think that there's many different threads that we can follow, and actually I want to reivindicate our role on the definition of that future. I mean, the future is not something that will happen to us, it's something that we can redefine. But the question that I'll do once again is, what is the job to be done regarding the physicality? I mean, what is the reason that you're going to give anyone in order to take the effort to leave their home, the comfort of their pajamas, and take the car or whatever and go to a space? I mean, you have there needs to be a massive incentive, and right now I think that that is only necessarily for very, very limited activities. So, for example, for signing agreements, or for special moments on the lifetime of a business or of a professional lifetime. But I'll see that my intuition is that these tools that we are using effectively now will boom. And actually, there's no reason today. There's no study after study. We're seeing that people don't like going to offices. I mean, there's many kind of profiles that need to go to the office, but in general, we are much more productive at home. Now, I've recently heard a speaker speak about the tiredom of Zoom, because these requires a lot of attention. I mean, now you're seeing my face probably in a way that you wouldn't if we were sitting in a room, right? So that requires much more attention, much more dedication. So I don't anticipate a future in which we go back massively to the office spaces, unless in the office spaces we're able to generate a blend between the virtual and the physical, or a battery of incentives and motivations that really take us necessarily there. Otherwise, probably we'll go to these home, no mobility first or immobility first scenario.
Yeah, so I think we will discuss this again in the question answer session. Before I come to my question, I request all the audience to write down their questions in Q&A box or in chat box. There are many people coming from different countries, and they I can see their raise hands and all. So if people can write their question in Q&A box, it will be easy for us to select the question and take in the end of the session. So before Diego, like I want to understand one thing, that we have discussed about disruptions and the future technologies, and things are coming. Like sometimes your competition is creating disruption for you. Sometimes your people, like within the industry, you see disruption. But how do we identify these disruptions, challenges, and opportunities? Because it is very difficult to identify by yourself, because you are seeing your industry from the same eyes every day. You are seeing the same challenges. So like we discussed the same thing, like so how we identify these disruptions and how do we capitalize on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that the disruptions that we have affect basically our business model, our activity. That means our certainties, our assumptions. So if we're able to identify what in our business model we believe to be of paramount importance, for example, the barriers of entry, for example, those things that, those competitive advantages that supposedly protect us from competitors, or that make our business model sustainable over time. And if we go looking specifically at each one of those competitive advantages, if we go to look at the moats, those things, those barriers of entry, and we interpret how those moats might be broken by new realities, then we'll be, I would say, in the face of something. I mean, there's many different approaches to doing that, but reviewing our uncertainties, I would say, is the most important effort. There is a quote that I very much like, which is changing the answers is evolutionary, changing the questions is revolutionary. And to that I added, changing the assumptions is where disruption happens. The assumption is the disruption. If you think about it, the disruption is like the floor of our initiatives. I mean, these are like the foundations, and these are something that we're not going to change. But guess what? There's people that might be willing to go further in a more radical approach and revisit those assumptions. And by means of doing that, they're able to uplift their initiatives to completely unforeseen context. So review your assumptions would be the main focus. And once you start doing that, you can focus on each one of the areas, the solution space, the problem space, the modes, and all of those should give you indications of where you should be looking at.
Yeah. So we are getting a lot of questions, Diego, from different audience. So I would just like to pick up one question, which is coming from Mr. Ravindra Agrawal. Ravindra is asking, so what's the future of commercial places, especially in metro cities? And disruption, can it be a drastic that the cities will not be required at all?
So, two amazing questions. What is the future of commercial spaces? As long as we don't find a massive incentive for those commercial spaces to be put together, I don't think there's going to be a future, because I have people that have not left their houses for the last 4 months due to the COVID, and they still receive everything at home. So the reception is no longer necessarily the access to the goods, is no longer the main motivation. Another motivation should be there. It's going to be the social motivation. It's going to be the interaction motivation. What is it? I don't know, but we need to think in those terms. The jobs to be done now is different. So we should not insist building the past normal, because that is not what we are requiring. And now, after this COVID effect, we are seeing that we no longer need to go to the shopping mall. So either we have an amazing reason to go there, or we'll just don't go there. And regarding the cities, I'm not suggesting that we are seeing the death of a city, by no means. But everybody seemed to agree that cities were growing, and they're growing, and everybody is going to the city, because the city was the context in which the systematic interactions were happening, the exchange of goods, the meeting people, the talent, the emergence of these resulting from all of these interactions only happened at the city. It was the space where all of the layers were combined and flourished into amazing results. But now that is not necessarily the case, because we have the city and we have the virtual space and we have tools to solve for mobility. Right now, I only move 3.5 hours in average on weekends with my family, because more than that is a little too much. With a self-driving car, probably I could be riding 8 hours. Or maybe I could have my studio on the go, on the wheels. I mean, there is no reason to suggest otherwise, and especially when we see a transfer between growth of energetic capabilities of batteries, etc. So in that context? Is there a plausible future in which some of us are much more nomad? I would suggest there is. I mean, there is also other criteria, other reasons that might force into that nomadic behavior. For example, the climate change. I mean, we see that climate change is a great force that we haven't described in this conversation, but probably is one of the most important one that we should be looking at. And we see that many regions, at least in Spain, the south of Spain, are probably not going to be hostile to humans as the desertification advances. So this concept of the temporary urbanism might also be a reality. And you in India have an amazing example, right, of these temporary nomadic events in which millions of people gather into a specific place for religious regions. So that logic, I see there is a possibility that we see it in a good part of society too.
Yeah. So one more thing, like Diago, like we discussed, like the co-working, the co-working of the world today, it has been disrupted very badly. Like, so co-working has disrupted the office world. Like, you are making office for your company, and then co-working came in picture, and then they disrupted the whole office space. Now the co-working is also disrupted. I heard or I read one article in New York Times that earlier the co-working centers were in the city centers. The most important co-working is going to the most important place in the city. But now post-COVID, the co-working will be coming to near to your home. Like, it will not be in the city center. It will be the remote center where people can easily access. What is your view on this?
So what is the rationale behind the co-working? Why people go to co-working spaces? Well, there's the price of the space and the comfort of it. But I would say that the main reason to go to a co-working, at least in my opinion, is the serendipity, is the interaction, these random interactions with other people that might amplify your knowledge, accelerate your knowledge, and the learning faster is probably the key concept here. So the concept of serendipity, creating a space for serendipity, is most relevant, especially related to the value proposition of the co-working. But serendipity is very inefficient. Networking is really, really slow. And now we have tools that allow us to make it a matter of data instead of a matter of luck. And I'm talking once again about digital tools, about collaboration tools, about us, Tushar, you and I, finding each other and understanding the alignment that we have, of the mutual interest that we have and the complementarities that we have, and working together. See, this is something that wouldn't happen in a co-working. It has happened thanks to another technology that has hacked the serendipity in that sense. So that is where I suggest we start looking. I'm not saying, I'm an architect. I think the space has a massive impact on our reality. The light, the perspective, the side that we have, it really changes our mood. The receiving the solar insulation, but there's many functionalities that were basically related to space in the past that no longer are. They are decoupled. So I guess my strongest recommendation is, let's try to find bridges between what is virtual and what is physical if we want to have the physical remain relevant.
So I think perfectly answered, Diago. Like, I remember last session we were discussing about that. What is in between an intersection, like not physical, not the fully virtual. What is the intersection, and how can we change the future of work by doing something as a right intersection? But Diago, like I remember when the WeWork, the word was like was discussed everywhere in the world. That we were discussing about the community, like community manager, community thing. And it is all business model was based on the community connection and the kind of the technology. They never said about the real estate. They never talked about real estate. But later on, the copied model was purely a cheap commercial real estate, which is available on the cheap price. The most of the people, those who copied the system, they've copied only the design. They have copied only the cheap real estate practice. They have not copied the actual. I think the actual, sense behind that community. I think you have rightly covered that. But I'm coming to the next question, which is coming from Mona Shah. Request you to throw light on how the preferences to stay at home will play out in culture that are collective in nature. The USA for 40% gig mode, and companies are comfortable with home-based jobs. What is your view on this?
So we spend way too much time on commuting. I think in the United States it's a little south of 2 hours a day, and that is time that you can dedicate to what really is meaningful to you, whether it is work or whether it is a relationship with your peers, with your family, etc. My understanding is that we need the changes for us to move. The reasons for us to move are changing. I mean, in the past I would go to pick up a pizza or to buy a shirt. Now I don't. Now I just receive it at home, right? But I'll still move. I still want to see my friend. I still want to go out. I want to go in nature. I'm not saying we're going to stay at home. I'm not suggesting we are desocializing ourselves. I'm saying that that socialization is happening through different channels. So, or we will move for different reasons. See, I made a quick survey around some of my friends, asking them precisely what reasons now in the middle of the COVID, under what circumstances would you move? And the answers were, well, if somebody really needs me due to a medical urgency, or if somebody is about to die, or just for, meeting my girlfriend, I'll take the risk, etc. So there's reasons for mobility have changed now. So maybe those are the ones that we need to further explore. But by no means I'm suggesting that we will remain at home. That is a very sad image of the future that is plausible in some societies, such as Japan apparently, but it's non-desired. So hopefully we'll be able to give people reasons to leave their homes. The art, as I mentioned in the beginning, this intersection between the public space, the collective space, and the low technologies could actually be an incentive. I mean, we tend to think of the public collective space as a physical first, and then in the best case scenario, we have a digital layer on top of it. But now we can make a different approach to that and really merge what is physical to what is digital, to really have a mirrored world, or a world in which you can be both simultaneously in the physical and in the digital.
Great. So we have Ajit Sareen who's asking on LinkedIn. So we were live on the LinkedIn, said that how does one foresee the challenges and the way out in your business? So again, we discussed about the real estate. So if you give the answer in the context of real estate, how would you like to describe this?
So in real estate, there is one basic variable, which is the value of the place, right? That is a fundamental assumption. What is in the city center is more valuable than the rest. And now we're seeing that concept of value is diminishing. I mean, here in only 4 months in Spain, we're seeing that the demand is shifting. People no longer prefer to be in the city center. Now they prefer to be in the surroundings, where they might have a terrace for a better price, or they might have more access to nature. Why? Because the working part is already solved for. That is a certainty, an assumption that we had regarding the price, the curve of the price of the city that might be overwritten. See, once again, it is on your assumptions where disruption will happen. It is on your understanding of the job to be done and the things that supposedly protect you that probably will be where disruption will happen.
Great. One question is coming about, I think I would like to answer also that Sid Mehta is asking that how we show our properties, how we show our home to brokers or maybe some buyers. So I think Matterport or maybe a lot of virtual technologies are there, which you can without going physically on the site or physically on the property, you can just show it to your customers or in buyers. And it is very much in use in US or other Western part of the world. But now in India also, I think the Matterport or other technologies are quite relevant. And I think post-COVID, one thing which will be disrupting the real estate very badly is about prop tech, meeting brokers to making designs to making, constructing. I think also, last comment, Diego, you want to say something about what 2-3 technologies which is disrupting prop tech or maybe real estate? Any one or two?
I'm gonna keep on provoking you into thinking in different terms. I just went through a cryptocurrency masters, a guy that I know that happens to know an amazing load of it, and he was doing a little master for some of us. He of course didn't have any certification, no need. I mean, it was driven by the curiosity and the generosity of this person. Joel Diaz is his name, one of the most relevant actors in cryptocurrency in the world. And we were trying to understand precisely in this mirrored world, the physical and the digital, how do you create equivalence between what is physical, between, for example, the Mona Lisa in physical and the Mona Lisa in virtual. So there needs to be a bridge of authenticity, and in that context, these technologies that we are starting to get used to, like blockchain, must be most relevant in that sense. So now we have blockchain, now we have a digital world, and now we have a property rights that need to be written both in the physical and in the digital. So there's a space, a food for thought there that I strongly suggest you take a look at.
Thank you, Diego. I think we are already at 5:15. Thank you, audience, for coming today and attending this session. We have very interesting sessions coming in this leadership series. We have another session with Pascal Finet. He's a professor from Singularity University. He will be coming on 8th of July. And 1st of July, we have very interesting session with reimagining and rebooting economy with Abhishek Somani, Mr. Vineet Agrawal, and Mr. Anil Rai Gupta, and Mr. Rajiv Memani, chairman for Ernst Young India. So we look forward to see you more often on Workplace Trends, and we will be starting our first newsletter, which is like a collective aggregative news around the real estate, and will be coming soon to you. Looking forward to see you again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tushar. What a pleasure to share this space with you, and please don't miss the conversation with Pascal Finet, because he's one of the masters that I've learned from.
He's another guy who really impressed me and like given a lot of inspiration to me, Diego. And let's look forward to connect again soon. Thank you everyone.